The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
You've always got time for Short Time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine. The one and only Chael Sonnen. And you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Episode 302 of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. We're going down to the great state of Iowa. And today, it's a big day around the country. It's Inauguration Day. Regardless of your politics, it's a big day in American history. But soon, there could be a turning point in Iowa wrestling history as we're talking about the coverage of the Iowa High School State Wrestling Tournament. Today, joining us on the program, Troy Banning, sports editor of the Daily Freeman Journal out of Webster City, Iowa, and Tony Hager, one of the founders of iWrestle.com and vice president of Takedown Wrestling Media. And the short story is, I'm going to defer to Troy on this here real quickly, but for those of you who are outside of the state of Iowa, or even in the state of Iowa and haven't heard of this, there is some type of media, I guess not necessarily a ban, but definitely a tightening of the noose in terms of credentials, access, and just generally the news media being able to do their jobs in the way that they've been doing it for umpteen billions of years. So, Troy, I'm going to first turn this over to you, where I first heard about it on your podcast, 3 Up, 3 Down. You talked about this for about 20 minutes. We're going to focus the entire program on this issue, but let's just start from the very beginning. If somebody is unfamiliar with what's going on with the Iowa High School Athletic Association and specifically the state wrestling tournament as it relates to credentialing.
Well, hey, Jason, first off, thanks for having me on here. It started maybe earlier this month, two weeks ago maybe. We received a letter emailed from the Iowa High School Athletic Association just outlining what they called some new media guidelines for the state wrestling tournament coming up. The first thing, I guess, that caught my notice wasn't even about specific changes to that. It was to the fact that media was now going to go through the Iowa High School Sports Network to get their media credentials for state tournaments, for boys' state tournaments, rather than the Iowa High School Athletic Association, which was unique, I guess you could say. But from there, in terms of the changes to the Iowa High School Athletic, or to the state wrestling tournament, Media Row, which has always been on the floor of Wells Fargo Arena, the site of it, for all the print journalists, Media Row was no longer going to be there. Instead, they were taking it off the floor, putting it into a back room. It's basically down a hallway. I think they're going to curtain it off. That's where we are supposed to watch a state wrestling tournament from now. The print media, they're going to put 2 TVs in there. So essentially we're being asked to go there to cover it, to watch TV. That was scary enough, I guess you could say, to some people. And so I just started asking some questions. I called to Athletic Association and talked to Bud Legg, got some answers to why they were doing it, or at least why they were saying they were doing it. And then as we were getting ready to do our podcast Sunday night, my co-host Ross Tady and I were talking about photography, and neither one of us knew the answer to what they were going to do to photographers, because that wasn't in the first letter they sent out. So I sent another email at about 1:00 a.m. Monday morning and got a response later that morning that said photographers would no longer be allowed to be mat side, whereas we usually just sat on the mats and took photos of the matches we had. Now they were putting up, they called them barricades, that all photographers, well, print media photographers, had to stay behind. And that didn't go over well. And that's kind of where this all kind of blew up on Monday, when that information got statewide to enough people. And that's where we're at today.
Now, one thing that jumps out at me is, and having worked as a print journalist for 8 years and also having worked extensively with the web for the last 15, the one thing that you said that jumps out at me is the credentialing is through the Iowa High School Sports Network. Now this is not essentially the same as the Iowa High School. This is a private organization that's being contracted by the Iowa High School Athletic Association. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, correct. The Iowa High School Athletic Association sold the broadcasting rights to what is now called the Iowa High School Sports Network, I believe in 2006. And it was a 10-year contract that was up last year. They renewed it. This is the first year of that new contract. And the IHSSN, the sports network, is a private media firm that, they're out to make money off this. And so they have so they own all of the broadcast rights to the state football playoffs in Iowa, to the state wrestling tournament, and this boys state basketball tournament. And so they have a financial interest in being the number one provider of media coverage. And so for the print media to now be under them and have to go through them for credentials, to me is just ludicrous. It makes no sense. And I'm not quite sure when it happened why the Athletic Association thought that this was going to be no big deal, because I think it is. It's a big deal.
Going over to Tony here, and this is Effected Takedown Radio, which is based in Iowa, Takedown Wrestling Media, with the television show that goes across not just one set of media partners, but throughout the country. We've seen Takedown Wrestling on several different cable networks and satellite providers. But this also infects TakedownWrestle.com and IA Wrestle, specifically, Tony, with you. Where are you with IAWrestle.com web credentials? And we already know that Takedown Radio has been denied, or Takedown TV has been denied any video credentials from the state tournament.
Yeah, so as of last week, I was told by multiple media sources that IA Wrestle was actually going to be restricted. We actually had a media member tweet that these policies have been put in place because of IA Wrestle, which is completely liable for starters. But so I was really worried that we were even going to be able to cover the state wrestling tournament. We cover the whole state, and then we have all the newspapers that cover their small communities and their bigger communities. So we can't touch all the different lives that all these small newspapers do, but we can tell the videos, and not your normal journalism, I guess, ways. And I was really, shocked by that, because we brought a lot of people to our website. We had over 70 interviews last year, and it was we told a lot of great stories. And that's what I was really worried about is Briar Cochran. Okay, this is a story for you. Last year, his dad made the state finals. The only state champ from Moravia. He was able to get it done just like his dad did. Small town Iowa. That story would have never probably been told if we didn't get that interview. I think Annie Hamilton got it as well. But it's just what he was telling me was that I was no longer going to be able to do those interviews, that those were his property, and he has the video rights to the interviews in the hallways or the back room. So a little background for people that haven't been inside Wells Fargo, these tunnels go all the way around the arena, and these kids can go out of 3 different ports, 3 different tunnels, and then you never know where the heck they're going to run after their match. So it's, 1, difficult to find them, and 2, to get the interview. And there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. But now I went to the Iowa High School Athletic Association and said, okay, is this right? Did you guys sell the rights to the interviews off of the event floor? And they in turn said, no, you have the ability to do longer than 30-second interviews with your athletes. You can keep them up for 48 hours. That is not what I was told by Ken Crow. And that's what I was really upset about. But so for right now, I feel like we're pretty good to go. But as of Monday, Tuesday, we were not. So this uproar that Troy did and the other media around the state of Iowa has changed the policies and regulations that's been set forth. So it's a great deal.
Troy, in terms of what Tony's talking about is, hold on, Tony, do you have more to add there?
Nope.
All right. So Troy, going back with what Tony's talking about, and because newspapers are getting into this digital age as well, it's not just, okay, file your one story, print, update for the right through, depending on the size of the paper. I mean, newspapers they have, you're doing blogs and video and interviews, things like that. So the 30-second interview restriction, for example, that was something that would also impact you guys from a digital rights perspective.
Yeah, correct. I don't do a lot of video for our newspaper just because of everything else I do. But as of last year, prior to the 2016 state wrestling tournament, the Athletic Association or the Sports Network, it might have been both or one of them, I'm not sure, sent out another email that said then all newspapers, there was no longer any video that could be taken mat side. And that was a big deal as well, just because a lot of newspapers had gotten into that of shooting just short, clips of matches. We're not talking shooting the entire match and posting those online, but just like a 10-second clip of a match to go along with an interview is what a lot of newspapers did, and what a lot of newspapers required of their reporters. And then so starting last year, all of a sudden that was no longer allowed. And then that's just kind of snowballed into where we are today. So, I mean, the beginning of this kind of started last year when that notice was put on regular print reporters.
All right, I'm going to also throw this out here, too, because correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say, I don't even know the year. It was probably 2-3 years ago. The NCAA Division I Wrestling Championships were in this very same arena. And, 8 mats down on the floor. Press row was a little tight, but it was still on the floor. These restrictions that seem to have come down from again, which is, Troy, I think you're right here, baffling that a media outlet has the right to determine who gets credentialed. But the NCAA restrictions are not this tough. The NCAA has hundreds of journalists down on the floor and a working press room. It just seems to me, and then Wells Fargo with that arena. Yeah, it's a nice arena. But they even had room to put one of the most restrictive organizations, the NCAA, and give the media much more access than the Iowa newspapers are doing for the arguably one of the crown jewels of high school wrestling across this country, the Iowa State Tournament. And it going back and listening to the 3 Up, 3 Down show, I think the statement that made the most sense to me, that makes no sense at all, is it basically behooves the Iowa Sports Network that you guys in the print and internet media can't do their jobs effectively, so they get more money from pay-per-view, they get more rights, and et cetera. I mean, it just seems like a cash grab in some respects, and the fact that they're more restricted than the NCAA media is baffling to me.
Oh, absolutely. The Iowa High School Sports Network, they paid for these rights. I don't begrudge them to make money off this. It just feels like they are taking it a step further of saying, not only do we want to make the money off this, but we want to ensure that other media are hurt by this, if that makes sense. I've been covering state wrestling tournaments for 18 years. I can't remember what year. Tony might remember what year it moved to Wells Fargo Arena. But since that, sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Well, I think it moved in 2000, and I want to say it was like 5, because I wrestled 03 in the barn.
In the barn?
So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. The setup has been great there in terms of, and it's been my favorite state tournament to cover just because of I enjoy wrestling, and it's been fan friendly, it's been media friendly up until now. The Iowa High School Athletic Association talked about making these changes because they wanted to free up space. They said it was too congested on the floor for wrestlers, for coaches, for cheerleaders, and for media. I've covered every one of the state tournaments held there, and never once has one person that has been on the floor talked about how packed it is and how uncomfortable it is, and it's miserable to get around. I've never heard that one time. They want to free up room for wrestlers and cheerleaders, but when wrestlers and cheerleaders are called to the mat, they let them walk down the middle of the aisles or down the middle of the 8 mats. So a lot of the time, they're not even in the aisles where the media are for this congestion. And the last thing I'd say on that is how quickly if this is true, if this is the real reason the Athletic Association wants these changes, then how quickly they forget. Because compared to the barn, to Veterans Memorial Auditorium, this place is spacious. I mean, the barn was cramped. You couldn't move 2 inches. So I just do not buy their reasoning for why they're making these changes.
I think Andy Hamilton even told me a story about the barn and when the brackets used to be handed out, like the people hanging out would like hang off a balcony or something like that and drop depending on where the press was sitting. I never got the chance to experience a state tournament at the barn or even at Wells Fargo at this time, but just the stories that the media tell me, KJ Pelcher and Andy tell me about covering those tournaments in the barn and what it used to be like. And then this whole thing surfacing, I think, and Troy, I think, Is it true that some people are actually really you've kind of taken the torch on this, being vocal about it? It seems like some reporters and outlets are actually saying, oh, they're not being publicly critical of it because they don't want their credentials being compromised for taking an opposing stance on this.
I don't know that. I haven't talked to other reporters that have said that, so I can't confirm that. What I will say is when Ross Tatey and I, before we recorded our podcast Sunday night, we asked, do we really want to do this? Because it's true that our credentials very well could be compromised by the Iowa High School Sports Network now. If we're critical of that entity, they don't have to credential us. They could take it away. So far, we haven't heard any word from them, knock on wood. But, this is one of those things where I'm not going to stay quiet just because I'm afraid of what might happen. I think this is wrong. I think it's wrong for a multitude of reasons, and I'm not really going to stay quiet on it.
Tony, from the internet and TV side of things, with Takedown TV, the ability to create highlight packages and things like that, and they tend to live on the internet for a while. I think the 48-hour rule we've seen here and there, and I think a lot of people say, okay, that's nice. I don't think a whole lot of people actually abide by it if you look at anybody's Sports Information's YouTube channel, at least on the college side. But this impacts the fact that an Iowa-based wrestling television show is not going to be credentialed for the Iowa High School State Tournament. Scott's been doing this a long, long time. This has got to be baffling to you guys at Takedown Media.
Yeah, it was a kind of a shocker to Scott. It's not a huge deal to him because with TV, we have the ability to get the highlights from online. But with us having a radio show as well, it's about telling the story of being at that arena and trying to project that onto your listeners that listen to the Takedown radio show, which is 9 to 11 on Saturday mornings. It's right before the placing rounds, the final. So just being able to tell a story that you maybe would have seen for those credentials to be taken away is something that I would never have thought that Takedown TV or radio would be denied credentials. And here's the thing, too. There's another layer of the television aspect of this. The semifinals and finals are on Comcast Chicago, and our television show is on Mediacom, KCWI, and it serves almost the whole state of Iowa. So if somebody in northwest Iowa has no shot at getting Comcast Chicago unless they pay big bucks, they could watch our show for a highlight from the state wrestling tournament, maybe see their kid, maybe see their nephew. But no, we're not going to get that opportunity. And that's what was shocking about the Takedown TV situation. The email that we got is they don't allow for any syndication or nobody that's not on a news channel to come in and shoot highlights of the event floor. So it's I don't want to say that I think that there's a relationship issue there between maybe Casper and Krogman, and that's why credentials were denied. But that is the reason why leaving the credentials in the place of the media holder is just ridiculous. Like Troy said, this should be up to the Iowa High School Athletic Association to decide who can come in and cannot cover this wrestling tournament. And, if you break the rules, then I think, somebody like the Iowa High School Sports Network should be able to say, hey, these guys are not following the 30-second guidelines. They're breaking the rules. Then they can be denied credentials. But nothing has ever been done wrong by Takedown TV, Takedown Radio. And that's what I think is happening. Is a relationship is what's refusing the credentials.
Troy, as this relates to the media ethics side of things, do you feel that this relationship between the Iowa High School Association and the Iowa High School Sports Network has that, maybe while it's legal, do you think it just has that little bit of, this seems a little unethical?
Absolutely. It stinks, to put it quite bluntly. With this whole thing, I know, and I don't agree with the Sports Network with a lot of things they've done. But I tend to have more issue with the Athletic Association on some of these things, just because the Athletic Association is the one that agreed to give all of this away in the negotiations with the Sports Network. And to me, it just seems like I don't know if it was a money thing or what, but they did not have to give away all of the power to the sports network, and they did. And now they're kind of at the sports network's, I don't know, mercy of what they want to do. And so are the rest of us media. And that's why I have a big issue with it. And that's why I'm afraid that no matter what the Athletic Association says about how it's not going to affect us or limit our access, I'm just afraid it is.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Go ahead, Tony.
I mean, JD, you can think about last year at New York City at Madison Square Garden. We had a few people on the floor that were able to cover down there. Then we had a ton of people up top. They had to go from clear up top down below to try to get an interview. But they were able to at least watch the action clear up there and know if they had a possible interview. Now all the media is getting pushed into a hallway in a closed room. It's like us covering the NCAA tournament from where we eat dinner in St. Louis. It's just that just seems insane. Why not just stay home, pay the $10 to watch the whole event, and cover it from home? I mean, if I'm a newspaper in Ogden, Iowa, or Sioux City, I'm not going to pay my reporter or pay to have them cover the state tournament $100 a night, most food, or whatever travel, when they can just stay at home and watch all the match the exact same way that they would if they come to the state wrestling tournament, and just call the athletes or call the coaches for interviews for their print, for their deadline. If I was a newspaper, I would be absolutely furious about this situation.
Yeah, Troy, Tony brings up an interesting point, and this is also tied to the television thing. I think there might be a little bit of hole there because not everybody in the state of Iowa is going to be able to watch this based on this agreement with Comcast Sportsnet. I believe it's Comcast Sportsnet Chicago. I mean, are people in Sergeant Bluff going to be able to get this thing? Can they watch it the way that somebody east of I-35 would be able to?
Well, if Dish subscribers like Dish TV and Direct TV, satellite subscribers can get it. Like I live in Ames, and I have Direct TV and I have access to Comcast Sportsnet Chicago. I'm not sure if it's on their lowest package or if you have to buy it, the next tier up or whatever. I'm not sure on that. But Mediacom is the state's #1 cable provider. And from what I understand, if you live in the eastern portion of the state, you can get it through Mediacom. But if you live in Des Moines, in Ames, in Webster City, anything west of there, 96% of the state cannot get Comcast Sportsnet Chicago through Mediacom. It's just not available. And not only that, but so you say, okay, I can't get it on TV, but I'll order it online. I'll order the feeds and watch it on my computer. Well, the internet feeds that they're going to charge for are only around for, I believe, the first 2 rounds. If you're wanting to watch the finals on your computer, then you have to have cable access to a company that has Comcast Sportsnet Chicago. So if you're a Mediacom guy in the western portion of the state, you can't watch it on TV, nor can you buy it and watch it on the internet. So you're basically, SOL there.
So what Tony's saying is some papers will have that availability. Be like, all right, screw it, we're just going to stay here and watch. And then if they don't know that, I mean, for people who are understanding what the cable access provider means, that's when you click on a stream on the internet, like on the Big Ten Network or something. You're trying to watch a stream, be like, oh, enter your Verizon or your Comcast or your, that's what we're talking about here. So you're basically double locked out. Oh, well, it's online. Well, not if I've got to subscribe to cable to get it. Well, I can't get the cable station. Well, I'll watch it online. Well, I got to have the cable to watch it online. You're in a severe catch-22. One thing from my experiences is when I went to Baku, Azerbaijan in 2007 for the World Championships, and this is, bear with me here, there was no press row. There was no press tribune, as they like to say overseas. Nothing. I flew halfway around the world on my vacation to cover the World Championships and basically watched most of it from a back room. And then again, this was a doomsday scenario. And this was even before really web streaming. So it was bad. I mean, you've got hundreds of international journalists not even allowed to get near the mats. So it's kind of similar like that. So basically the Iowa high school situation resembles the old FILA, which, as we know, was one of the worst run organizations in sports, maybe less than FIFA. So we're comparing the 2007 FILA run regime, which limited everything, to what's happening now in 2017. That just, Tony, that seems a little maybe overstating it, but it seems fairly accurate in this position.
It's pretty close. It's if you, and I said this one time on KXNO, is, you know, I feel like the people that have made this decision are not thinking about what this could do for sports in general. I mean, we're struggling to get kids out for sports, really wrestling. This is, we always continue to get bows in wrestling, and this one is a killer. If you don't have media to grow this thing, you don't grow wrestling. And the state wrestling tournament has, the reason why it's so big is because of the media has been able to do so many great features, you know, leading up to the state wrestling tournament, during the state wrestling tournament. If you go to another big high school tournament in Iowa, it's just not the same. Even the same kids are there. It's not as huge because the media has built it up to be this thing. If you didn't take away the media, you're going to take away the prestige of the tournament. And I don't know. Media tells the story. Media tells the story of these kids, why they're ranked number one. And to the people that have no clue who these kids are, for 3 days or 4 days out of the year, they'll get to look in the paper and say, wow, that kid is from my hometown. I'm going to tune in and watch this kid because I love Ogden, Iowa, and I'm going to support them. And if they don't have somebody to be able to tell that story, then that person is not watching wrestling. And that's a problem for me that wants to help grow wrestling. And this is hindering that. And another thing, this is not just wrestling too. This is for basketball and track. I think Troy probably knows more than me. I don't like to care about wrestling. So it affects those other sports. And with basketball, when the game's over, you can talk to all the kids, obviously. But with wrestling, you've got hundreds and hundreds of kids getting done with their competition any given minute. So it's not as easy to go get these kids as it would be in basketball. So if the same rules apply to basketball to wrestling, it's you're comparing apples to oranges. And I feel like no one got consulted from the media. No one called Troy. No one called Des Moines Register. No one called the Gazette and say, hey, what do you think about this situation? Would this maybe help us or not? And I just feel like the wrong people weren't involved in some of the decision making.
Troy, your take on that? I think it's a pretty good point to bring up.
I agree. You know, the kids and the coaches, to me, make the tournament just in terms of the work they put in, and it's phenomenal. But in Iowa, of the state tournaments, boys, girls, everything, at least since I've been doing this, the state wrestling tournament is the crown jewel. I mean, tickets sell out in minutes from when they go on sale for the finals, months before it. People pack that place for 3 days. It is Iowa's biggest state tournament. And the media is a big part of that. And we have been for a long time. You know, we were around a long time before the Iowa Sports Network came in, telling these stories and getting them out to the readers and all of that. And to limit what we can do, I feel is just wrong. And I said in a column I wrote, you know, this weekend I'll be covering the North Central Conference Wrestling Tournament, which is Webster City. And I'll be there for 8 hours on Saturday covering that. Last weekend, I was at the Perry Invade for 7 hours. I said, starting January 1st, I have 7 straight weekends where I will be spending almost my entire time at a state wrestling tournament. I'll see these wrestlers more than I'll see my own family. But it's because I tell their stories and I want to see how they are. And that's my job. And so for me to have all of that access during the regular season and know these kids and know their stories and have people relying on the stories we're telling, to all of a sudden when they get to the biggest stage, to have my access, at least what I perceive to be limited, but in order for a company that doesn't know these kids, that probably doesn't even know how to pronounce these kids' names, for them to come in and get first dibs on them, I guess, is just wrong to me. And it's frustrating for me. And that's part of the reason why I've been so willing to speak up about this.
Well, here's the problem, Troy. there's a problem, Troy, is if they were going to, I think you might feel a little bit differently. If they came in and they actually told the stories, or if they did the video interviews and they did that work, it'd be completely different. But we're doing something that they're not going to do. So why can't we do it and tell that story? I mean, if they're going to come in and say, hey, we're going to have a press spot and we're going to have a nice camera set up, do these interviews, it'd be completely different. But they're not doing the stuff that we're asking to try to have access to.
No, not at all. I mean, I personally haven't watched their broadcast because I've always been there in the finals, covering it. But from what I understand, I mean, they cover the finals and they cover the matches and they talk about the matches, obviously. But it's not like there's any detailed background to these kids and their stories and the matches leading up to it and things like that.
Yeah, and look at the relevance of the newspaper. People can say that newspaper, the industry is dying. I mean, I'm looking at my old paper. It's a lot smaller than it used to be, but there are still people who rely on this thing. You cannot hang up a screenshot off the internet with any effectiveness that goes on your wall. I've got newspaper clippings on my wall. Wrestlers have clippings. There's something about the paper that is always going to be tied to, especially high school sports. And here's where I think the one line, I think, Troy, I'm not sure who you cited with this, but it said, it's not going to affect your job. How do you know that? Because if I'm sitting there, I'm not going to Iowa and Penn State as we record this on, Friday afternoon, January 20th. I'm not going to that dual meet tonight. I won't be able to cover that the same way as if I was in Carver Hawkeye. I don't think anybody can say, well, it's not going to change your job. Do you know what my editor, Troy, do you know what you're assigning your photographers to shoot? What does the editor know what, Andy Hamilton was going to write when he was writing for the Des Moines Register? They don't know how it's going to affect their job until it's probably too late. So that's one thing that irks me as a former newspaper guy. And two, the stories that you're talking about, the newspaper story is going to tell the story about the kid from Sloan who is the first state qualifier in umpteen years. And then here's what you get on TV. Well, he's the first qualifier since Bob. Do you know when? I think 84. And that's all you get of that story. The newspapers have that ability to tell those stories better than the 2 hours you get on television.
Yeah. And one thing I would add to that is I'm not talking just about the kids that are making the state finals and winning state titles here, especially in communities. I have a daily newspaper, but we're still a community newspaper. It's the stories of the kids that make it to state for the first time, and they might lose twice, but they got there. To small communities, that's just as important as the kid that makes the semifinals or gets on the medal stand or makes the finals, wins a title. And so those stories, the kids that win it might be told by bigger newspapers or get time on the sports network, but not the kids who just qualified. And you're taking away their moment as well if you're limiting my access or other reporters' access.
Yeah, and Tony, with the web, you've talked about this, and iWrestle has done a good job at really, kind of doing a big overview of the state, but still, you guys have that knowledge. Maybe not as to the extent as, say, Troy does about the Webster City area. But, for example, about the Webster City kids. And you're like, okay, well, we can touch on that. And then you link to the newspaper that's got the story that goes in depth. I mean, there's so many different ways to cover this, but you've got to be there. I mean, I know it's not as a entrepreneur who owns my own business in wrestling. I'm looking at it going, okay, if I'm going to cover the Minnesota-Nebraska match, I'm not going to do it from the sports pavilion next door if it's at Wayans Arena. I expect to be Matt Sider. I expect to be at a press table, whether it's somewhere in the arena where I can see something. And that's the most disturbing thing to me is that, okay, you guys are gone. Have the people making these decisions, have they ever worked an event in this respect in their lives? It seems like the answer is no.
I couldn't even imagine if I went to a USA Wrestling event and I had to go through Track Wrestling or Flow or anybody that had rights to the stream or the broadcast, having to go through them for the credentials. Why would they want to have a competitor there? And I mean, that's just business. And I get that's what he's doing, but he doesn't want his competitors poach off some of his advertisers and whatnot. And it's just, I can't. There's ESPN was at Iowa State versus Kansas on Monday or Tuesday this week. And I was talking to just people on the radio. I was like, can you imagine that you've been covering Iowa State all year long, and ESPN comes in, which is obviously the top dog, and you have always been able to go in and talk to the point guard after the match in the locker room. And ESPN comes in and says, you can't do that anymore, and we're going to limit your access for this game. I mean, that kills your leadership, and they want to know why you didn't cover it. Do you not like Iowa State anymore, or what? It's just an opportunity for somebody to create some type of monopoly. And if I'm just looking inside the wrestling world, I wouldn't want that to happen. And it's going to limit wrestling or any sport in general if we have media controlling the media credentials. We can't go down this slippery line. Got to get that fixed.
All right, Troy, how this affect? Go ahead.
Can I just add one thing on that? The thing I find interesting is this week some pressure's been put on the Iowa High School Athletic Association, and they've responded. Executive Director Alan Bestie sent out another email just a day ago, addressing some of these issues we have, and I just kind of shook it off because all he did was double down on the new policies and then talk about misinformation like we got it wrong when I know we haven't. But the thing I found most interesting is that they have never once addressed this question that a lot of people have brought up about the credentials and going through the sports network. They have not mentioned it, and it's like they just want to, act like our questions about that don't exist and forget them, and maybe everybody will forget it. But if you're a member of the print media, you're not going to forget this or let that story die.
And I know I went through this, not this, but I went through a situation. You're going to get this type of response. And I applied for a credential for the Minnesota High School State Wrestling Tournament. Now, I'm based in Minnesota. I don't necessarily cover a whole lot of it. I do have a podcast for The Guillotine, which is the main wrestling source of information up here. But I'm mainly covering national things. I had a free weekend open. I was like, all right, I'm going to go get some stories from the Minnesota High School State Tournament. I got the response is, well, I've been covering this 20 years. I've never heard of you. Eventually, I got credentialed because I had people go to bat for me. But you're going to get that, well, I don't know who you are, especially with the internet. I mean, the newspapers, you really have a hard time arguing, I've never heard of your newspaper when, we've been around 100 years. All you got to do is Google it. Internet situations, you have a little, well, I've never heard of your website. Well, okay, my company's 2 years old. I've been covering wrestling for 20 years, okay? That was the one situation I got into. And that's another thing you're going to have with credentialing. These guys, well, I've never heard of you, so no. You're going to get probably a lot of people are going to be fighting for credentials that have been there for more online or more feature-ish type of things. If I wanted to come down and do a feature, I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, the big thing was going to be John Nicholson versus Derek St. John. I'm sitting there going, I should go down to Iowa and do a feature on that match, them meeting in the quarterfinal. It's a big deal. I would have never been credentialed under the current status of being able to come from out of town and do something national on a high school feature. So I think, Troy, I think we're going to see a lot of no's for no good reason other than people are unfamiliar with how broad the media spectrum goes. It's not just print, journalists, and TV stations that do this stuff anymore.
Yeah, and one thing, and Tony can talk about the way he has to go about getting it through the radio and through online publications. For newspapers, this is what we were explained. There is no longer a need for newspapers to apply for a specific state wrestling tournament. Say, from now on, we are going to get a permanent pass at the beginning of each school year is what it sounds like for the boys' state tournaments. Weekly newspapers in Iowa are going to get one credential, and here's the one that made me just kind of laugh. All daily newspapers will get 2 credentials to each state event. Okay, I'm a daily newspaper, and the Des Moines Register is a daily newspaper. We are not the same.
Yeah, what's your circulation?
A little over 5,000, I believe.
Okay,
so, I mean, we're one of the real small ones.
Des Moines Register is probably upwards of 100,000. So,
yeah, I have honestly no idea. But to say I get as many credentials as the Des Moines Register is just ludicrous, and that's coming from me, And the Des Moines Register, I know in the past has sent out. They have at least 2 photographers there, sometimes 3. During the finals, I believe they have 3 photographers, 1 for each mat. Reporters there, I've seen as many as 3 reporters there. They might have a 4th there. So they might send upwards to 7 news reporters and photographers to the state wrestling tournament. And now you're saying they only get 2 credentials? And so I don't know if they raised a stink about that and have gotten that altered. But according to that first email that we got, that was what it was going to be. And that hasn't been addressed either.
You'd be like, sorry, Urbandale readers, all we're getting Southeast Polk coverage today.
Exactly.
I do kind of come on their side a little bit with these credentials that did kind of need to be a little bit more kind of tinkered down a little bit. There was a lot of people that were getting credentials that do cover sports that weren't actually using their credentials. They were using it as a ticket. I mean, on that media row, Troy, I'm sure you saw multiple seats that had credentials that actually never even showed up for a session. And that takes away from the people that would want those spots. So I do kind of see where their head was at, is maybe trying to squeeze some people and lower the amount of media space that they have. But if it's how that credentialing process maybe could be figured out is, do you have to say, hey, these are my past articles, this is my past work, prove this, and this will show you that I've done some work on the state wrestling tournament. I feel like I've had to apply. When I tried to get credentials for the University of Iowa, I had to show a body of work that I covered the Iowa Hawkeyes for a certain amount of time. And then I had to actually go out to the University of Iowa and do an interview with them, because we are a site. We're a website. We're not a publication, so it's a lot harder for us to get credentials. So we had to go through a little bit of a process, and I don't know if maybe that's what they were thinking of. They need to try to kick sites out like mine, that anybody that covers wrestling at one point in time can get credentials, or maybe what their thought process was. So I'm trying to look at both sides of things, but in the end, it's really going to probably hurt us. So does that make sense? Well, why I think maybe where their head was at?
Yeah, it does to me. I said the only thing I could see it the other way too, though, with newspapers is that a lot of, for example, or weekly newspapers, if they don't have a wrestler, they're not going to show up, or they're not going to apply for a credential, anything like that. But now they have one. What's stopping some of these newspapers that don't, aren't going to cover it? They've got handing it to a mom or dad and letting them come down. There could be a scenario where there's even more people now credentialed there because they've sent out all of these, permanent credentials.
Yeah, that's a good point. How are they going to be? Are they going to check people's IDs? The names aren't on them there. It's just I wrestle, and there's no IDs or names or anything on them.
No, I said on ours, all it says is Daily Freeman Journal. Yeah.
Yeah, and from a NCAA standpoint, for example, having to go through this process since 2002, the very first year it was very similar to what Tony kind of explained, minus the interview. But I had to list how many schools that I covered of Division I wrestling when I was a startup website. Mat Talk in its infancy was mainly Virginia. Thankfully, I had 5 or 6 Division I's within the state of Virginia, and I had the schools that were coming in, repeatedly. But when you go through that application process, I'm wondering who's going to take care of the vetting process. Tony, I think, brings up a good point, because this is one of my pet peeves as the president of the National Wrestling Media Association, is walking down press row and seeing people wearing team jackets cheering. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. How did you get in? And they're obviously getting somebody from a smaller paper to credential. I mean, you got to purge that eventually. I don't think this is the way to do it. But I do remember one point, I'm working at USA Wrestling. I'm standing up to look for something. The guy's sitting behind me going, hey, are you working? And I look, he's got his coat around him. And I'm like, okay. And actually, I believe it was a paper in Iowa. I looked down, okay, I don't want to throw the Charles City paper under the paper, but I think it was the Charles City paper. And I'm looking going, yeah, where's your laptop? Where's your notes? Okay, yeah, don't talk to me. So Tony's got a point with purging a little bit, but the thing is, who's going to take that responsibility to vet this stuff? It's certainly not going to be this TV network who can just say no and then not be done with it. I mean, that's their easy solution. But I think we're going down the wormhole or rabbit hole. We could probably talk about this for hours on end, and I expect, Troy, you to do that quite more frequently. And Tony, I'm not in Iowa, folks. So if you're listening, pardon my ignorance on the Iowa State Tournament and how this whole thing works. That's why we've got 2 people within the great wrestling state of Iowa to explain it. But Tony, I'm going to pitch to you for final thoughts on maybe what you think should happen with this, and then we'll close with Troy on his thoughts on maybe resolutions.
Well, I just think in the end, some media should be included in some of the conversations, just kind of a back and forth deal before rules and regulations are posted on the website. Rules and regulations have continuously, they just keep getting changed. I don't know if Troy has noticed this, but if you go and look at the rules and regulations, they are changing here and there. So you might think one thing is one way, and the next day you go, and it's different. So don't put out the rules unless you talk, I think, to some media members and bounce off some ideas that maybe not fit your objective if you're wanting to cover the state wrestling tournament. And at the end of the day, newspapers absolutely have to be there, and websites like ours have to be there in order to help the product of what the Iowa High School Athletic Association is trying to put out. This is the best state tournament in our great state of Iowa, in my opinion. We were featured in Sports Illustrated for a reason. Not very many sports in Iowa could probably say that. Our state wrestling tournament was featured in Sports Illustrated, and there's a reason for that, and that's because of the media, in my opinion, and our great wrestling. That's all I got.
Troy, take us home.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tony just said. That I really, really wish the Athletic Association would have sent out a kind of feeler email 6 months ago saying, hey, here's some of the things we're thinking. What do you guys think about this? I guarantee you every print reporter that covers that tournament, I won't say everybody, 99% would say, yeah, sticking us in a bad room or in a back room is a bad idea. I just wish there would have been that back and forth. Not all of a sudden 5-6 weeks before the tournament starts, send out a mass email that says, boom, here you go. Here's what's changing. Accept it. And not only that, but in the past week and a half when there has been serious blowback on this, and I'm not blowing it up to say it's just a little bit. I mean, this has created a big controversy in the state of Iowa around the sports, environment. Now they've just said, sorry, we're doubling down, and this is the way it's going to be. And their basically response is, how do you know it's going to be bad if you haven't done it yet? If we haven't gone through this yet? That's the response. They're basically saying, give it a chance. And I'm afraid that's what we're going to have to do, is give it a chance. Do I think it's going to be great? Absolutely not. Do I fear that my access is going to be limited, both with photography and the print side of it? Yeah. And I guess the biggest frustration is there just doesn't seem like anything we can do or say, at least from a print media side of it, to change it or to get through to them to see our side of it. And so, as I've told some people this week, come February at state tournament, it's going to be frustrating, but I'm not going to pout about it. I'm still going to do my job as well as I can. And hopefully this doesn't limit me, but I guess we'll find out in a month or so.
Yeah, and if you want to check out Troy Banning's podcast along with your buddy Ross there, it's at Freeman Daily Journal. It's 3 Up, 3 Down on iTunes. You can also go straight to freemanjournal.libsyn.com. I'm a Libsyn user, so I'm glad to see you guys have your show over on Libsyn. 19 of my shows are on Libsyn, but that's where you can listen to his podcast. A lot of wrestling information if you're interested in the state of Iowa. A lot of high school stuff from that area, but still wrestling content there. I'm going to have to throw it onto my my shows that often feature wrestling directory on mattalkonline.com/directory. And I guess the last thing I want to say, I want to drive this point home. This is the one that I was speaking with, I'll say, an unnamed member of the Iowa print media, that the timing of this decision is clearly calculated, and that way you won't have a whole another month to work that blowback up into something change. I mean, 5-6 weeks out, okay, they're just saying, yep, this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to release it. This seemed calculated to me based on just everything that I've heard so far. So, Troy, best of luck on getting fighting the good fight for the media, because it's not just us. We're not fighting for, we want the good seats. We're fighting for the readers. Doing that in the newspaper industry for my career, it's not always about selling papers. It's about putting those papers on the wall in a frame for little Johnny, who finished 7th at 113 pounds, whatever the weight classes are these days. So, and Tony, for what you guys do at IA Wrestle, it's been a tremendous plus for me, who pays attention to Iowa wrestling, but it's a lot easier for me to do it now with IA Wrestle and the other outlets there. So you guys continue fighting the good fight, and I appreciate you guys coming on.
Appreciate it, Jason. Thank you.
So a spirited conversation there with Troy Banning and Tony Hager as we're back to normalcy, I guess, here in Minnesota at the – I don't have a studio name. I don't have a sponsor for the studio. I don't have any of that cool stuff. I just got me sitting here in the what's going to eventually be the Monarch Speakeasy and studio with stuff on the wall, my wife working from home today, and after she just totally crushed me again in Dr. Mario. But anyway – I'm currently embroiled in a rental car dispute with Avis right now, too. So that's going to be, I was a little fired up right before I recorded the outro here. But anyway, talking about college wrestling season. And here's some things I want to tell you about because we've got the dual meets for the next couple weeks. I talked to Kevin Dresser on Inside Virginia Tech Wrestling about their potential national duels lineups. And you want to see where the teams are in the standings, go to MadTalkOnline.com. On that right side, you'll see links to all the scores and all the standings. So it's you've got standings for Division I, Division II, Division III, the NAIA. I'm still working through the junior colleges because a lot of them really don't have any type of sports reporting information. I mean, you'll go to some websites and you'll just see, the schedule and nothing updated from like October. And like a logo that just says men's wrestling or something. So sometimes the junior colleges struggle with that. But as best completed scores, standings, only place you can find them on the web at madtalkonline.com. So I'd like to thank you for your support in that respect and the support from Jeffrey Lathrop, the latest member of the team. And folks, don't worry. The swag's coming. The draft glasses are here. Got some stickers ready. Got to get another shipment of hats and T-shirts in. But don't worry. It's not like you get that right as soon as you do it. So I've got to make sure those shipments are coming. And at this point, I'm going to try to get them out before the postseason. But with a rough stretch coming up, and I'm getting smiles and eye rolls from my wife here as she realizes that I'm going Pac-12s, NAIs, D3s, D1s. Okay, what could you possibly show me right now?
A picture of the new president.
A picture of the... Let me see this. Okay, so this is the internet meme that's... Okay, we got a...
You don't want to get political.
No, I hate politics. We got a saltine and what looks to be either peanut butter or perhaps a room temperature aerosol cheese. Not like either really has much integrity. So anyway, that's a picture that's floating around Facebook. My wife is not supposed to be joining this show today, but she's interrupting. Again, on a show where I have 4 episodes to release. I'm going to work from home today.
You don't tell me anything. How am I supposed
It's on the calendar. I put it on the paper. Yeah, that's a Super Troopers reference she's not going to get. Anyway, joining the team is going to get you some cool stuff and access to certain things and people and things and just a good old time. I'm so sidetracked now because Abby has interrupted my show.
Sorry, edit me out. It's fine.
No. You're going to get the full brunt because if they're members of the certain team levels, they can go to the private Facebook group and then talk to you directly about how you interrupted the show. This is also going to be much easier. You can't even hear her, folks, because I'm using a dynamic microphone. When we get the studio built, she'll be able to like sit here and be like, actually talk back. Then I can actually mute her on purpose.
Hey.
So that being said, back in the saddle again, going Aerosmith on that. Going to get a lot more shows pumped out here as we're going to log them up. Raleigh Peterkin, I know I've been talking about getting him on the show for a long time. I'm finally going to just say do it. I haven't finished the book yet, but we'll talk to Raleigh. I'm going on a pro wrestling arc, and just bear with me. I'm going to get people that actually did wrestle and explore the world of sports entertainment and that. But that's what I got right now. And I want to thank Tony Hager from Takedown Wrestling Media and IAWrestle.com and Troy Banning from the Daily Freeman Journal in Webster City, Iowa, for providing content for this episode and fighting the good fight. This last 5 minutes of this show with me babbling incoherently. Hey, cool. That's what I got. You got time for this, right? You've got time for this because you've always got time for short time. In the worst close ever on my podcast.
Why don't you redo it?
I don't want to redo it.
Why?
Because this is I'm just throwing in the towel for this episode. I might want to hit stop.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.